Okay, so I'm in the refined paint layer. I just keep building up. But I'm going to show you a little trick because it's always fun to come back to these. I had turned off the gray background because I wanted to see what it looks like with just the white behind. And that helps me see little parts that still need to be filled. I still have, work to do on the shirt to be sure, and on the neck, even though there's not a whole lot of neck in my reference. On the chin, some of the highlights, definitely the hair. But at this point, what I might do is this. I might quickly play with it a little bit. This is an advantage of digital painting, right? I can say save as a PNG, and I'm going to call it a test PNG, to the desktop. So what does that do? It automatically flattens it. I could do a JPEG as well, but a PNG makes it a little bit higher quality. And then, come on, I'm going to get out of Photoshop. I'm just going to minimize it. And once that PNG shows up, I'm going to play with it in Preview. A very simple visualizing program. It is getting hung up, so let's see. Trying to kickstart it into finishing. And by playing with it in Preview, I can really push its saturation, I can push its color balance, I can push its contrast. I can do a lot of these things, there it is, that I might be too timid to do now that I've worked so much on it in Photoshop. So let's just open it up in Preview. So not finished, but a lot of my final colors and my values and composition are there. So now I'm going to go to Tools, Adjust Color, and I actually really recommend this just to see different takes on yours. So the first thing you can do, of course, is you can hit Auto Levels, because we're not always the best at knowing that we're going dark enough or light enough. And so the only thing that Auto Levels really changed for me is it changed my darkest dark from being here to being around here. A deeper contrast. You could play with your saturation. You can take saturation down, see what it looks like in grayscale, right? You can take it way up. And that looks ridiculous because my colors are already pretty saturated. But if you had painted it in pretty muted colors, it might be really interesting to see what a little bit of extra saturation does for them. I'll just kind of play with it. You can play with your levels, your midtones, just like you would in Photoshop. What if I brighten up the midtones a lot? And then deepen the dark shadows and really brighten the highlights? Does it still look like a portrait? Does it still look like that person? Or are there major flaws that I'm going to notice from doing this? You can always go back down to Auto Levels. And then my favorite are the color balance. You can play with the tint, add kind of blues into everything, add greens into everything, pinks, and see if the color balance is exactly what you want. What if I wanted to go kind of a more sepia route? What if I wanted to sharpen all of my soft edges? What if I wanted to dim my shadows? Increase my saturation? Really increase the contrast? Maybe push it a lot more pink? These are all things you can play with. And they might reveal something to you about it. So I kind of like this. And this is very different than what it was before. Now, because we saved it as a PNG, I can then just close it and it will automatically save on the desktop. And I can see how different that is. Now that I've played with it and really pushed it, see how different that is than what I have. I can even drag and drop it on top as a new layer, right? And then what I can do is take that layer and I can overlay it. I can play with its opacity. I can do soft light. I can do pin light. Let me try soft light here at a lower opacity. And without doing much, I can kind of do a targeted improvement of certain colors, certain aspects. And then if I rasterize that layer, because it's a raster layer anyway, it only came in as a smart layer because I pulled it from the desktop, I can really decide how much I want of it. And without it now, it just looks kind of grayed out. So I'm going to lock a few of these and then do more refined painting on top of that. And let me see, I think I was playing around with it before. Yes, and I have another one here that's really extreme. And I kind of like that, where I really blasted it out just to get some of the brightest kind of brush strokes. And I liked the energy of them. And I like the strong oranges and blues. Maybe blend that in. It certainly brightens it up. Let's see. Maybe do pin light with this. I tend to like soft light. And that definitely makes it more kind of illustrative and dramatic. And yet, because it's digital painting, you can still see everything clearly. So these are all different techniques you can have to kind of push your work a little bit. So let me push that down. And now, okay, now I'm going to save it. And all I did was make a PNG, play with it a few different ways, and bring that back on top of the image before I continue with refined painting. And it just gives it a little bit more life. This goes beyond kind of the abstracting you can do by taking down certain layers. Though that's a lot of fun too. So much to do. And eventually we're just replacing everything with our own strokes, kind of locking them as we go. Let's see what that looks like with a gray background. Yeah, so now I'm going to turn that gray background back on, because now I feel like I kind of have a handle on it. I'm liking how extreme it is, and now I'm going to continue with more refined painting above it. So I'm still using the same brush. It's at 73% opacity, pretty low opacity considering what I've mostly done. Fairly small brush. Try to keep it as big as you can. As big as you're comfortable with, so you don't get too lost in little details. And now I'm going to look at some of those big things that really popped out while I was messing with it. Like this big blue patch isn't really there. There is the dark value, but it's darker at the base of the lip than it is right at the corner of the chin. You've got the divot in the chin. And I think the reason I like that that technique with going outside of Photoshop and just using something more basic and crude and more straightforward, like Preview, to sample like how far you can push these things, is simply because when you're using lower opacity brushes like this, and you're more focused on kind of overall finish and texture, we tend to be more timid in our creative choices. And timid is not a great thing when you're trying to be creative and exciting and engaging to an audience. But it's the natural thing to do when you're learning something. So you have to kind of ride the fence between those two things. Taking new chances, trying new things, being experimental, and yet really trying to learn from everything you do. See what makes sense. So basically, it's like the history of art itself. You experiment, you push it too far, and then you start bringing it back to something more rational. But when that gets boring, you experiment, you push it too far, then you overcorrect, you bring it back. For you art majors who are going to be taking art history or have taken art history, that's like high classical Greece, having perfectly reasoned aesthetics, beautifully ambitious reproductions of the real world in their art with a timeless beauty and virtue, making the Parthenon, being an inspiration to future generations. But then you can't stay at that level and still stay interested in it. So what do they turn? They turn to late classical, where they turn everyone kind of more into Barbie dolls and idealize perfection. And then they go to Hellenistic, where they become more dramatic, more theatrical, more entertaining. And then that's what the Romans really catch on to. And they spread that through the empire. The only reason we know about classical Greece is because it came back into fashion during the Renaissance as a reaction against the Gothic, which had been way overdone, way overdramatic. And then when people got sick of the Renaissance and the High Renaissance, they go to Mannerism. They got way overdramatic, pushed things too experimentally, but they weren't done. They go to the Baroque. Baroque turns into Rococo. It's just lavish. It's crazy. It makes people so mad they start beheading their rulers. You have revolutions, political and cultural, and it's a return to neoclassicism, which goes back to high classical Greece, and it's why we have, the politics we have today, all that good stuff. So that balance of rationality, safety, and just exciting experimentation. You got to have both in your technique, I think. Now, if you've done a lot of painting, a lot of kind of higher level drawing and design, you've heard about being willing to fail and make lots of mistakes. And what will happen is you'll discover, sometimes they're called happy accidents. You'll stumble onto things that actually you really enjoy, that really kind of solve a design problem or an aesthetic problem. But you don't always know how they work. So you just have to keep messing around and keep being willing to really mess things up in order to learn how to do those things intentionally. Now, if there's anything that's most different about the digital painting project and what we've been doing in the class thus far, it's that this project is a lot more reliant on just your instincts, putting something down and then reacting to it. And those instincts get better and better the more you do it. Yeah. All right, so as you work on one part, you'll see other parts that need some attention. And you'll see in my case, these kind of wrinkles that are too strong and need to be pushed back a little bit. And you might even decide you need to go at a lower opacity to control them even more. But I've already kind of set on a level of paint finish that isn't really very smooth or super refined. And what's nice about that is I can just kind of throw these blemishes in. So he has these freckles. Once you have the basic structure, you can start putting in these other embellishments.